Make her stop crying, one passenger shouted, frustration thick in the air. Ethan Hale's hands shook helplessly until a young black girl rose from her seat and did something so unthinkable it silenced the entire plane. This wasn't just about a crying baby. It was about pride, pain, and a stranger who dared to do what no one expected. But what no one knew was how it would change all of their lives forever. What would you have done in that moment? Ignored the cries, judged the father, or stepped in like she did? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I want to see how many of you would have acted. Before we jump in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what kind of story do you crave next? Drop your answer in the comments below. If stories like this grip your heart and refuse to let go, well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got another powerful story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get into today's story. The world knew Ethan Hale as untouchable. Millionaire tech visionary, CEO of Hale Enterprises, a man whose name opened doors and whose stare could silence boardrooms. But tonight, in the dim solitude of his penthouse, none of that mattered. The lights of Manhattan glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but Ethan wasn't looking. He was hunched over a leather chair, suit jacket tossed carelessly on the floor, his tie loosened like a battle flag after defeat. Beside him sat a silver-framed photo, his late wife, Lily, smiling with the warmth of sunlight. She'd been gone nearly a year, and yet her absence filled every corner of his life. In the next room, a faint whimper began to rise, building into a sharp cry. His baby daughter, Grace. The sound pierced through his exhaustion, dragging his weary body upright. He shuffled into the nursery, his chest tightening. Grace was red-faced, fists clenched, tiny legs kicking against the soft blanket. Ethan reached for her, awkward and hesitant, as though every movement was a test he was destined to fail. "Shush, sweetheart," he whispered, bouncing her with all the clumsy desperation of a man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals but couldn't soothe his own child. The cries only grew louder. Ethan felt the weight of it, the helplessness, the loss, the crushing responsibility he hadn't asked for. He sank into the rocker, clutching Grace against his chest, whispering promises he didn't believe. "I'll figure this out. I'll be enough." Somehow. For Ethan, tomorrow's flight to Los Angeles was supposed to be a turning point. A chance to prove to himself he could handle both the empire and the fragile child in his arms. He didn't know yet that it would be the flight that changed everything. Across the city, in a much humbler apartment, Amara lay zipped her worn canvas duffel bag. The walls around her were cracked, paint peeling, the hum of the fridge in the background the only sound. She sat on the edge of her bed, fingers grazing a faded photograph tucked into her journal. Her mother, arms around her younger self, both smiling wide despite the hardships that had marked their lives. Amara was 22, a senior in college, working 2 part-time jobs just to stay afloat. By day she studied psychology, hoping one day to counsel children who had endured the kind of losses she had. By night, she cleaned offices, folded clothes in department stores, and tried to ignore the ache of exhaustion in her bones. Yet, despite everything, Amara carried herself with quiet resilience. Her laughter came easily, her compassion even easier. Friends often teased her that she could calm anyone's nerves, that kids especially clung to her like she was made of safety itself. Tonight, though, she was nervous. Tomorrow's flight to Los Angeles was no casual trip. She'd saved for months for this conference, an academic event where she'd be presenting her paper on trauma in childhood development. It was the kind of opportunity that could open doors she'd never imagined. But underneath her determination, there lingered something else, a whisper of doubt, a fear that she didn't belong in spaces like that. She packed her journal last, slipping it between textbooks, as if the words of her late mother, scribbled in margins over the years, might carry her courage. The next morning, their worlds moved in parallel without yet colliding. Ethan arrived at the private section of the airport, Grace bundled in his arms, his assistant frantically sorting tickets and luggage. He was used to chartered flights, quiet cabins, the luxury of control. But tonight, control wasn't an option. Circumstances had forced him onto a commercial flight. Grace was already fussing as they made their way through security. People stared, first at the famous face, then at the baby whose cries echoed like a warning bell. Ethan kept his head down, jaw tight, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. At the same time, Amara clutched her boarding pass in line at gate 27. Her heart raced, not from nerves about flying, she'd done that before, but from the fear of presenting herself on a stage full of strangers. She murmured a quiet prayer, adjusting the strap of her bag, when she caught sight of the man across the terminal. Tall, impeccably dressed, though his eyes looked haunted. A baby cradled in his arms, fussing despite his attempts to soothe. She didn't recognize him, celebrity faces weren't her world, but something in the way he held the child, with a mix of tenderness and desperation, made her pause. For a moment, their gazes almost crossed. His eyes flicked upward, hers lowered quickly. Two lives, two burdens, walking toward the same plane, neither knowing how fate was about to intertwine them. And as the final boarding call echoed through the terminal, both Ethan and Amara stepped toward the jet bridge, their paths narrowing until collision became inevitable. What do you think? Can strangers truly sense each other's pain before words are spoken? Comment below if you've ever felt an unexplainable pull toward someone you didn't know. The cabin air was already heavy with tension when Ethan slid into his seat near the front of the plane. Grace wriggled in his arms, her cries sharp and insistent, echoing off the narrow walls. Passengers cast side glances, some curious, some irritated, others whispering under their breath. "Isn't that Ethan Hale?" A man murmured to his wife. "The billionaire?" She whispered back. "Then why's he flying commercial?" Ethan pretended not to hear. He adjusted Grace's blanket, kissed her temple, whispered soothing words he didn't believe in. His chest tightened. "Please, just let her settle. Just this once." But Grace's cries only grew louder, piercing and relentless. The flight attendants exchanged nervous looks. One even offered, "Sir, maybe she needs." "I've tried," Ethan snapped, instantly regretting the edge in his tone. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at himself. A toddler 2 rows back began to cry in sympathy. A man in a business suit groaned loudly. "Great. This is going to be a nightmare. Can't he just hire a nanny?" Another woman muttered, not softly enough. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pulled Grace closer, bouncing her gently, but the helplessness in his eyes betrayed him. He had built an empire through control, precision, and willpower, but none of it mattered now. In this moment, he was just a father who couldn't calm his daughter. Amara sat 8 rows back, her window seat pressing her against the cool pane. She tried focusing on her notes, her mind on the conference, but the cries filled the cabin, making concentration impossible. Still, what struck her wasn't irritation but recognition. Before we dive deeper in, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And if stories like this hook you in seconds, hit that subscribe button now. Tomorrow's story drops, and you do not want to miss it. Now back to it. The baby's cries weren't just noise. They carried a rhythm, a rawness she remembered from her own childhood. The sound of a child crying not just for hunger, but for comfort, for presence, for something deeper. She glanced forward and saw him, the same man she'd noticed in the terminal. His expression wasn't one of arrogance but anguish, as if every cry was a reminder of something he couldn't give. A flight attendant tried again, offering to take the baby for a moment. Ethan shook his head. "She's mine. I'll handle it." His voice broke on the word mine. The cries grew louder, and the cabin seemed to shrink with every wail. Finally, a passenger in the back shouted, "Make her stop crying already." Others chimed in, groaning, muttering, and rolling their eyes. Amara's chest tightened. She could feel the man's shame radiating across the rows, his helplessness cloaked in silence. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Her steps down the narrow aisle felt both reckless and inevitable. She stopped beside Ethan's seat, ignoring the stares of every passenger. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice steady but warm. "May I try?" Ethan looked up, startled. His first instinct was to refuse. He didn't know this young woman. She was a stranger. His pride flared. What kind of father handed his daughter to someone else on a crowded plane? But Grace's cries clawed at his chest, relentless, unyielding. His hands shook with exhaustion. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the baby's wails. Amara didn't waver. Her eyes met his calm, compassionate, sure. There was no judgment in them, only understanding. Slowly, reluctantly, Ethan handed Grace over. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Amara gathered the baby against her chest with practiced ease, humming softly, her hand resting gently against Grace's back. She swayed ever so slightly, her movements instinctive, tender, as if she had known this child all her life. And then, impossibly, Grace's cries faltered, softened, until within moments, the cabin filled not with wailing, but with stunned silence. The baby's eyelids fluttered, her small body relaxing into Amara's arms. Passengers stared, wide-eyed. Someone whispered, "How did she do that?" Another murmured, "Unbelievable." Ethan's throat tightened. His heart hammered. He couldn't tear his eyes from the sight of his daughter, nestled peacefully against a stranger's chest, soothed in a way he had never managed. The humiliation stung, but underneath it was something deeper, something he didn't have words for. Awe, gratitude, and a flicker of hope he had long thought extinguished. Amara looked down at Grace, her face softening into a smile, then glanced up at Ethan. "She just needed someone to feel her," she whispered. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a criticism. It was a truth spoken with such gentleness it disarmed him. The passengers began to settle, some still whispering in amazement, others returning to their books and screens. But for Ethan, the cabin felt transformed. He had no idea who this young woman was, or how she had done the unthinkable. All he knew was that, in that moment, he wasn't alone. If you were Ethan, would you have handed your baby over to a stranger on a crowded flight? Or would your pride have stopped you? Comment below. I'm curious how you'd handle it. For the first time in months, Ethan exhaled, watching his daughter sleep peacefully in Amara's arms, unaware that this small act had just unraveled the walls around his heart. The peace didn't last. As Amara stood in the narrow aisle, still swaying gently with Grace in her arms, Ethan straightened in his seat, the CEO mask sliding back into place. His voice came low, clipped. "Thank you, but I've got it from here." His hand extended, waiting for his daughter. To the passengers, it sounded like gratitude. To Amara, the subtext was unmistakable. "I don't want to feel weak. I don't want to need you." She hesitated only a second before smiling politely. "Of course," she said lightly, handing Grace back with practiced ease. "Just glad she's calm now." But she saw the way his fingers trembled as he took the baby. Saw the stiffness in his jaw, the shame woven into his posture. He wanted to erase what had just happened. Grace stirred at the shift, a small whimper escaping. Ethan tightened his grip, rocking her awkwardly. "See? She's fine," he murmured, though the edge in his voice betrayed more desperation than confidence. Amara returned to her seat, feeling the weight of the passenger's eyes still on her. She could hear the whispers. "Saved the whole plane. Lucky the girl was there." She pressed her palm to her notebook, forcing herself to breathe. She hadn't wanted the spotlight. She just couldn't sit still while a child cried in distress. But the CEO's sharp tone lingered in her ears, a reminder that people like him rarely said thank you without strings attached. Ethan tried focusing on the baby's breathing, ignoring the glances, ignoring the young woman who had just shown him up. His mind raced. What kind of father am I, if a stranger can soothe her better than me? He hated the answer. The plane climbed into the clouds, and for a long while, silence filled the cabin. But it wasn't comfortable silence, it was brittle, charged. Ethan caught himself glancing back once, then quickly forward again. Amara was bent over her notes, scribbling something in the margins, her face illuminated by the faint reading light. She didn't look smug, didn't look like someone who'd just embarrassed him. She looked peaceful, determined, and that unsettled him even more. Grace whimpered again. Ethan's body tensed. This time, he whispered fiercely, "No, no, stay calm. Daddy's here." His rocking was stiff, mechanical. Grace let out a sharper cry, and his panic flared. Before he could stop himself, his eyes flicked back toward Amara. She felt it. She looked up, met his gaze for a split second. Neither spoke. Finally, he muttered under his breath, "She'll be fine. I've got this." Amara turned back to her notes, pretending not to hear. But inside, she thought, he doesn't believe that. Not for a second. The rest of the cabin relaxed into the routine of flight. Movies flickered on seat screens, attendants rolled carts down the aisle. But for Ethan and Amara, the space between them remained taut, a rope stretched thin. Later, as the plane hit a patch of turbulence, Grace startled awake, her cries erupting all over again. The sound spread like wildfire, heads turning, sighs audible. Ethan tried bouncing her, rocking, whispering. Nothing worked. His forehead glistened, his jaw clenched. Finally, Amara leaned slightly into the aisle, her voice low, careful not to shame him. Maybe she needs a change of position. Sometimes holding them higher helps. Ethan bristled. "I've tried everything." Her eyes softened, but she leaned back without pushing. "Of course. Just thought I'd mention it." To anyone else, it was a casual suggestion. But beneath the words was something deeper. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here to help, if you'll let me." Ethan rocked Grace harder, almost as if proving a point. The baby's cries shrilled louder. A woman across the aisle muttered, "For heaven's sake, just let the girl take her again." Heat rushed to Ethan's face. His pride screamed against it. He forced a calm smile, though his voice came tight. "She'll settle. She just needs me." Amara turned back to the window, heart tugging. She wanted to step in, but she also knew the look of a man drowning who refused a lifeboat. The minutes stretched painfully. Grace's cries finally softened into hiccuping whimpers, her small body slumping into exhaustion. Ethan sagged back in his seat, victorious on the surface, hollow underneath. He didn't notice the way his hand trembled against her blanket. Didn't notice the way his eyes shone with unshed tears. But Amara did. She closed her notebook, resting her chin in her palm, and thought quietly, "He's not arrogant. He's broken." Have you ever watched someone push away help because pride got in the way? Did you step back, or insist on helping anyway? Comment your story. I'd love to hear how you handled it. Grace slept again at last, curled in her father's weary arms, while Amara stared out the window, both of them pretending the silence between them wasn't louder than the cries had been. The silence didn't last. Half an hour later, the plane jolted violently, tray tables rattling, water glasses spilling. Gasps rippled through the cabin as the seatbelt light blinked on. Grace startled awake with a sharp cry, her tiny fists flailing against her father's chest. Ethan's grip tightened, his voice low and rushed. "It's okay, baby, Daddy's here, you're safe." But the words lacked conviction, his hand unsteady against the rocking turbulence. Grace's cries only grew shriller. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some covering their ears. A flight attendant leaned in, her smile brittle. "Sir, is everything all right?" Ethan gave a quick nod, though his eyes flicked with panic. "She's fine. Before we dive deeper in, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And if stories like this hook you in seconds, hit that subscribe button now. Tomorrow's story drops, and you do not want to miss it. Now back to it." That's when Grace twisted away from him, her little face pressed toward the aisle, toward Amara. For a moment, no one moved. Then Amara slowly unbuckled her belt, bracing herself against the shuddering plane. She reached out, her tone soft but steady. "May I?" Ethan froze. His pride told him to refuse. But Grace stretched out toward her, her cries breaking into desperate hiccups. His chest constricted, 1,000 defenses rising, then crumbling under the weight of his daughter's need. He let out a stiff, reluctant exhale. Just for a moment. The handoff was clumsy, the plane swaying, but as soon as Grace settled into Amara's arms, her cries softened. Amara cradled her close, rocking gently, humming under her breath. The contrast was stark, chaos dissolving into calm in a heartbeat. The passengers exhaled as if a collective spell had broken. Ethan leaned back in his seat, one hand dragging across his face. Relief mixed with something sharper, harder to name. Dependence. For a long moment, only the drone of the engines filled the cabin. Then, Ethan cleared his throat, forcing a joke. Guess turbulence doesn't rattle everyone. His tone was stiff, his smile thin. The subtext was clear. I don't like that I need you, but I can't deny it. Amara glanced at him, lips curving slightly. Babies don't care about turbulence, she said lightly, brushing a strand of hair from Grace's damp cheek. They care about feeling safe. Her words landed heavier than she intended. Ethan looked away, staring out at the endless dark sky beyond the window. For the first time in years, he wondered if his daughter felt safe with him. As the turbulence eased, Amara settled back into the seat beside him. Grace still nestled in her arms. Their shoulders brushed lightly, the proximity intimate yet accidental. Ethan swallowed, his voice lower now, almost grudging. She likes you. Amara smiled down at the sleeping baby, her touch gentle. She just knows I'm not afraid of her tears. The words lingered in the air, simple yet disarming. Ethan turned toward her, caught by the ease in her expression. He wanted to argue, to hide behind another stiff remark, but all he managed was a quiet, I wish I had that. Amara looked at him then, not at the millionaire CEO, but at the tired, aching father underneath. You will, she said softly. She just needs you to keep trying. The plane rumbled again, but this time Ethan didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl holding his child, realizing with a sinking, reluctant clarity that she was no longer just a stranger. Have you ever been forced into closeness with someone you didn't expect to rely on, and found it changed how you saw them? Share your story in the comments. The baby slept again, her head resting against Amara's chest, while Ethan sat beside them in silence, torn between gratitude and the unsettling truth that he no longer knew where his strength ended and her presence began. The silence stretched, not heavy this time but fragile, like a thread that could snap with the wrong word. Ethan shifted in his seat, his fingers brushing against the armrest before curling back to his lap. Almost unconsciously, his thumb rolled over the gold band still circling his left hand. Amara noticed. She said nothing at first, her eyes following the faint gleam of metal catching the dim cabin light. But something in his tense jaw told the story he wouldn't. Ethan exhaled slowly, voice rough. Her name was Julia. The words came like an unplanned confession. He kept his gaze fixed on the seat in front of him, knuckles white around that band. Grace was 3 months old when she passed. Complications. No warning. One day she was there, the next, his throat closed and he swallowed hard. Amara shifted, her arms instinctively tightening around Grace. For a moment, she wanted to speak comfort, but she stopped herself. Instead, she let silence hold space for him, choosing presence over platitudes. Ethan gave a short, bitter laugh. The doctors told me it wasn't my fault, but tell me, how do you raise a baby alone when the one person who knew how is gone? Amara lowered her gaze, stroking Grace's back in slow circles. The question wasn't really for her, but it pierced her anyway. She cleared her throat softly. You don't. Not alone, at least. He glanced at her then, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. Amara hesitated, as if weighing whether to peel back her own layers. Finally, she spoke. I grew up in a house full of people, yet somehow I was invisible. She gave a small, humorless smile. Middle child of 6. Parents always working. Brothers too loud, sisters too perfect. Me? I learned to stay out of the way. Her eyes dropped to Grace, sleeping soundly against her. No one ever noticed when I cried, so I stopped crying. I guess that's why I can't ignore hers. Ethan's hand stilled on the band. The raw honesty in her voice cut through him, echoing something he hadn't admitted even to himself. His wife's absence left him hollow, but Amara's story, different as it was, mirrored the same ache. The fear of not being seen, not being enough. Loss, he murmured, almost to himself. Different roads, same destination. Their eyes met, his lined with grief, hers shadowed with old loneliness. And in that quiet exchange, they weren't millionaire and stranger, CEO and passenger. They were two broken souls bound by the same wound, the emptiness of being left behind. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel judged. He felt understood. Amara adjusted Grace gently, whispering, "She won't grow up invisible. Not if I can help it." The words surprised even her, but the truth in them vibrated in the air between them. Ethan's chest tightened, not from grief this time, but from something he hadn't felt in years, hope flickering against the darkness. Do you believe people are drawn together by shared pain, or by shared hope? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel judged. He felt understood. The baby's soft breathing filled the space between them, steady and rhythmic, like a fragile metronome guiding them into a gentler rhythm of their own. Grace's tiny fingers curled around the fabric of Amara's sleeve, refusing to let go even in sleep. Ethan watched the small fist with a faint smile tugging at his lips. "She's got a grip like a boardroom executive," he murmured. Amara chuckled softly, careful not to jostle the baby. "Maybe she gets that from you." "God, I hope not," he said dryly, running a hand through his hair. "The world doesn't need another stubborn hawthorn." Amara tilted her head, smirking. "Oh, so stubbornness runs in the family." "Runs? It practically defines us," he said, lips quirking into the first genuine smile she'd seen all flight. Her laughter came easily then, a light, melodic sound that surprised even her. For hours she had carried the weight of the cabin's judgment, his pride, and her own hesitation. Now for a fleeting moment, it all dissolved. The plane hummed steadily, and in that cocoon of dim light and recycled air, they let their defenses slip. Ethan leaned back, voice quieter, less rehearsed. "When I was a kid, I used to be afraid of the dark. Couldn't sleep without a nightlight." Amara raised a brow. "You?" "The unshakable CEO." "Terrified," he admitted, almost sheepishly. "Julia, my wife, used to tease me about it. Bought me a glow-in-the-dark dinosaur once. Said it was my guardian." Amara grinned, picturing it. "That's actually kind of sweet." Her tone softened, thoughtful. "I used to hide in closets. Not because I was scared, but because it was the only place no one could ask me for anything. My sisters always wanted me to fix their homework. My brothers wanted me to fetch things. My parents." She trailed off, shaking her head. "They never asked anything, because they never really saw me." Ethan's eyes lingered on her, the corners softening. "And now?" She hesitated, adjusting Grace's blanket. "Now I still wonder if I'm just temporary in people's lives. Useful until I'm not." The confession hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Ethan's instinct was to reassure, but the truth lodged in his chest. He wasn't sure he could promise permanence when his own life felt like shifting ground. Instead, he let silence stretch, punctuated only by Grace's steady breathing. Then, surprising himself, he whispered, "If you were temporary, she wouldn't cling to you like that." Amara blinked at him, startled by the softness beneath his words. Her lips curved slowly, a smile that was almost shy. "You sound like you're starting to like me, Mr. CEO." He smirked faintly, though his voice cracked under the weight of honesty. "Maybe I am." Grace stirred, and Amara hummed gently, a tune low and soothing, almost like a lullaby. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, listening, not just to the song, but to the unfamiliar peace threading through him. When he opened them again, he caught her watching him with that same quiet warmth. And for the first time, he didn't look away. Do you think laughter and small moments of vulnerability are enough to build real trust? Or does it always take something bigger? Share your take in the comments. When he opened them again, he caught her watching him with that same quiet warmth. And for the first time, he didn't look away. It should have been a turning point toward something gentler. But sometimes, peace makes the silence too loud, inviting old fears to crawl back in. Ethan's jaw tightened, the weight of her gaze unsettling in ways he wasn't ready to admit. He cleared his throat, too brusque. "Why are you really helping me, Amara?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" His voice carried a sharp edge, born not of malice but of terror. People don't do things like this without wanting something. What is it, money? Favors? A story to tell? Amara stiffened as if struck. The warmth between them evaporated in an instant. Grace stirred in her arms, whimpering at the sudden tension. Her lips trembled, but her voice came steady low. I held your baby because she needed someone, not because you have a bank account. Ethan swallowed hard, the guilt immediate but the words already loose, poisoned in the air. Amara's eyes glistened, but she refused to let them fall. She pressed a soft kiss to Grace's forehead, steadying the baby before carefully turning toward him. Here, she whispered, arms extending. She's yours. Before we dive deeper in, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And if stories like this hook you in seconds, hit that subscribe button now. Tomorrow's story drops, and you do not want to miss it. Now back to it. The transfer was delicate, almost reverent, yet heavy with everything unspoken. Grace whimpered, resisting, her small hand still clutching Amara's sleeve. Amara gently uncurled the fingers, one by one, her eyes never meeting Ethan's. He wanted to stop her, to take it back, to unsay the words. But pride chained him to silence. The baby fussed in his arms, restless, while Amara sat back in her seat, arms folded tightly across her chest, staring out the window at nothing. The plane's hum filled the void, louder than before. No laughter, no warmth, just the echo of his doubt and her breaking heart. And in that silence, Ethan realized he had turned the only person who had offered him grace into a stranger again. Have you ever said something in fear or pride that instantly broke the trust someone had in you? How did you handle it, or do you still regret it? Share your truth in the comments. And in that silence, Ethan realized he had turned the only person who had offered him grace into a stranger again. The plane felt colder now. Grace squirmed against his chest, unsettled by the unease radiating between the adults. Ethan rocked her gently, but the child's soft cries seemed to echo his own turmoil. He looked sideways at Amara. She hadn't moved. Her body angled toward the window, her reflection fractured by the glass. The distance between them felt like an ocean. He wanted to reach across it, but his hand stayed frozen. Pride was a heavy anchor. Minutes bled into an eternity before he found his voice. Amara. No answer. His throat tightened. He tried again, softer. The word cracked. He exhaled slowly, fingers brushing Grace's blanket as if drawing courage from her warmth. I was wrong. Amara turned slightly, her profile sharp in the dim light. Her silence pressed him to continue. I thought I had to be strong, that if I let anyone close, it would mean I'd failed Julia. Or Grace. His voice broke on his daughter's name. But the truth is, I'm drowning. Amara's eyes flicked to him, quick and guarded, before drifting back to the window. Ethan swallowed, forcing the words out, each one jagged. When I asked what you wanted, what I really meant was, what could possibly make someone see me as worth their kindness? I didn't know how to believe it was real. The hum of the engines filled the gap where his courage faltered. Finally, Amara whispered, not unkindly, it's not about being worth it, Ethan. It's about needing it. And you do. Just like Grace. His chest ached at the truth of it. He nodded slowly, almost to himself, before daring to meet her gaze again. I don't want to do this alone, he said, raw, stripped of all CEO polish. Not anymore. For a long beat, Amara searched his face. Pride still tugged at her, the sting of his earlier words not fully gone. But beneath it, she saw the fracture lines. The man who wasn't untouchable, who was finally asking, not commanding. Her arms loosened, unfolding from the cage she had made around herself. She exhaled softly. Then don't. Do you think true strength is admitting when you need someone, or holding it all in and pushing through alone? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. Her arms loosened, unfolding from the cage she had made around herself. He exhaled softly. Then don't. The words hung between them, fragile but alive. Ethan blinked hard, relief loosening something deep in his chest. Grace stirred, her small body finally settling, her breath a tiny rhythm against his heart. Amara reached out, almost hesitantly, brushing the baby's blanket with her fingers. The touch was light, reverent, like testing whether this fragile new trust could hold. Ethan let her, no walls this time. The engines shifted as the plane began its descent, tray tables rattling, sunlight spilling golden across their faces. For once, Ethan didn't care how it looked. He just cared that she stayed. "Amara," he said, voice low, steady. "I'm not perfect. Far from it. But I don't want to keep pretending I don't need anyone." Her gaze softened, shadows of hurt still flickering, but no longer defining. "Neither am I," she admitted quietly. "Most of my life, I felt invisible. Like no one would ever really see me." Ethan's jaw tightened, but not with pride, with resolve. "I see you," he said, and this time the words carried weight, not as a CEO, not as a man shielding grief, but as someone choosing to open his heart. Amara looked down, hiding the tremble in her lips. She hummed then, the same lullaby that had soothed Grace hours earlier. But this time, the melody carried something warmer, something unspoken. It wasn't just for the baby, it was for him too. Grace sighed contentedly, as if declaring peace for them all. The plane touched down with a soft thud, passengers stirring awake around them, the spell of the sky breaking. Yet inside their row, something new remained, fragile, imperfect, but real. Ethan met her eyes, the corners of his mouth lifting just enough to suggest something he hadn't dared in a long time. Hope. And Amara, for the first time in years, didn't feel invisible at all. Do you believe love often arrives in the most unexpected places? Or do you think it's something we create when we finally let our guard down? Share your take. I'd love to hear it.
Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this story moved you, the next one will hit even deeper. It's more gripping, more unexpected, and waiting for you right now. Don't hesitate. Click the video on your screen, and I'll see you in the next story.